Kevin Pelton, ESPN.com, NBA insider. Great article after Game 1, which I think is interesting to bring back up here now after Game 4. He writes, Pete, why the Sixers are in better shape than you think after Game 1? Well, they were down 3-0. Now we're down 3-1 in the series. Does he still think the Sixers are in good shape? Kevin Pelton joins us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Kevin, what's going on, my man?
Well, no, it's hard to say they're in good shape at this point, but we're still in relatively good shape for a team down 3-1 in a series.
Now, what did you see in Game 1 that you thought that they were in better shape than maybe people thought they were at that time?
So it was a way to introduce some research I had done in terms of, how shot quality in the first game of the series translates to the rest of the series. A couple years ago, I used this data we have access to, the Second Spectrum camera tracking, where they break down the quality of the team's shots, what kind of shooting percentage you would expect from an average player given those shots, or then when you even incorporate for the specific players taking them, and found that, the whole cliche make or miss league, it's really quite true that the quality of shots is less important to winning a single game than whether you make those shots on that day. But then when you look forward beyond that, the shot quality becomes more important. So teams like the Sixers that have the better shot quality in the first game of the series tend to win more often, even than the teams that win Game 1 of the series. And that's kind of what I was looking at. And it's, it's interesting because it's played out that the Sixers have still had relatively good shot quality over the course of the series, at least by this measure, but just haven't been able to, knock those shots down, even to some extent last night.
Yeah, they only shot 26% from three-pointer. They haven't shot well the entire series here. So, under your premise, do you feel that maybe they're in for a good run?
Yeah, and the other aspect of it is, of course, that this has been an unusually close 3-0 series in a situation where the Sixers, despite being the lower-seeded team, were favored going in. So all of that is, why they've now been favored in all 5 games of this series. At this point, I think I saw that they were 1-point favorites for Game 5, which is, really unusual given the value of home court advantage in the playoffs. But speaks to what Vegas at least is seeing the same thing in terms of, the Sixers are the better team in this series, even though the results haven't reflected it so far.
That's crazy. They were a 9.5-point favorite in Game 3. I think they're about a 6-point favorite last night. And as Kevin just said, about a point favorite on the road in Game number 5. Kevin, TJ McConnell inserted last night. What did that do for the Sixers on both sides of the ball?
Yeah, I think really it made potentially a bigger difference on the defensive end, where you had McConnell to match up with Terry Rozier, who's been a problem for the Sixers all series long, and McConnell did a terrific job there. And I was reading Derek Bodner's terrific piece on The Athletics today about how much better McConnell has been defensively on Rozier than any of the Sixers' other options. And then at the other end of the court, giving them that second playmaker with Ben Simmons not as involved in the offense in this series, and kind of freeing Simmons up a little bit and helping to generate even more of those high percentage looks that the Sixers haven't been hitting so far in the series.
Kevin, what would you say TJ's effect was for Ben Simmons? What effect did TJ McConnell have on Ben Simmons' game?
Yeah, still not the kind of outstanding statistical game that we've come to expect from Simmons, but it seems like a more energetic performance for him, and that he wasn't pressing maybe the same way that he was in Games 2 and 3 of this series, with the Celtics defense slowing him down.
Yeah, and one thing with Ben Simmons, he did have 19 points and 13 rebounds. What we were saying was, Brett had said before that I got to do a better job of making my stars be the stars again. He essentially made Simmons the star by taking the spotlight off of him.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's interesting because there's been a long-running debate about, is Ben Simmons the point guard, or is he just a point forward? And that was the debate going back to the season he missed, where Brett Brown was adamant that he was a point guard. And then, it was interesting that late this season he said, that he wasn't sure that he would necessarily stay a point guard the remainder of his career. And, maybe now we're starting to see a little bit of what Brett Brown was thinking in terms of using Simmons in different ways. And, not that you necessarily want to do this all the time. He's had great success in this role this season, but occasionally it can be an effective change of pace.
So what do you think, Kevin, about the way the Sixers are using Joel Embiid? How should they be using him? Do you like the way that they've used him so far? Because he's kind of had different roles as each game's gone by.
Yeah, I mean, again, you look at the defensive end as maybe the more important adjustment, where getting him on Marcus Morris and off of Al Horford has, kept the Celtics from involving him so much in that high pick and roll and dragging him away from the basket and making him defend somewhere he's uncomfortable doing it. So I think that was really important. Offensively, it just doesn't seem at this point like he's going to be able to get things going in the post one-on-one against either Horford or Aaron Baines. So, to the extent that the Sixers can kind of minimize that and work towards using him a little more as a pick and roll threat, I think that's probably a positive adjustment.
Mike keeps saying that he thinks defense was the difference for the Sixers last night. We point to T.J. McConnell as being the story. Dario Saric came back to earth again. We saw him be in the stat line at the game when it was done. But do you think defense was the difference, and what adjustment did they make that made them so much better defensively?
Well, I think it starts with that McConnell adjustment and defending at the point of attack with Terry Rozier. I mean, the one thing about the Celtics right now is, as much as they've surprised us and been competitive, in this postseason without Kyrie Irving and Gordon Hayward, still without those two guys, that just reduces the number of options they have offensively. So if you take one of those guys out completely in terms of Rozier, then, you're just left with just Jason Tatum and Al Horford and, get a little bit of Jaylen Brown generating offense. And that's, probably a lot easier for the Sixers to deal with than if Rozier is in that mix as well.
Yeah, but real quick, the way Rozier is giving you what he's giving you offensively, he's a better defensive player than Kyrie. I'm not suggesting that he's a better player and they're better without Kyrie, but for this series, it has been a big difference. Rozier's defense gave the Sixers some problems that Kyrie's defense maybe wouldn't have.
Absolutely. I mean, that would be a place to attack, particularly if the Celtics were looking to switch a lot and you were able to get mismatches with Irving against Simmons and Embiid. That would be a potential spot. But, yeah, I mean, that's one thing we've seen all season long is they've been able to rely on their defense without Kyrie Irving, and that's a big factor in their success. And then whether they ultimately win or lose the game is, whether they can generate enough offense, enough outside shooting. And sometimes they do that, and they look really good, as we saw during the first, 2+ games of this series. And then sometimes that's not there; those shots aren't falling, and they look like a team that's playing with without two of their best players.
Yeah, Kevin Pelton, ESPN.com, NBA insider here on the Sports Bash. You had tweeted about Joel Embiid on the high pick and pop, and it seemed that last night the Sixers went with more trapping and then kind of left Embiid down low. They basically said, you're going to sit down there and rim protect, and then when the trap came, the ball went to Horford, and that's when Embiid kind of came out. They really moved Embiid a little bit, a slight adjustment, but it seemed to work.
Yeah, and I think another thing that you're able to do with more speed and quickness with T.J. McConnell on the court is to trap like that. And I think that was a positive adjustment. Now, we see what Brad Stevens draws up to kind of make the counter adjustment to that going into Game 5.
Got Kevin Pelton on with us. Kevin, what about the mask that Joel's wearing? Because Mike and I went back and forth about Joel and the low block, and we had Coach Jim Lynam on earlier talking about that he thinks maybe the mask is a little bit of an issue for Embiid. Clearly he doesn't like wearing it, but do you think it affects his peripheral vision, and is it affecting his post play at all?
Yeah, I think it could be a factor. I mean, that's probably makes it difficult for him to find teammates out of the post, which is not something, that's his first look anyway when he's got the ball down there. I think one of the big things that's happened here is that, he hasn't been able to just beast Al Horford. And what Horford's really done well when those guys are matched up, in my opinion, is take away kind of the counter moves that Embiid often gets guys with.
Yeah, and one thing, too, the Celtics have been content on defending him one-on-one, which I guess is a surprise to a lot of people that Embiid hasn't been able to just beat Baines and or Hurd in the one-on-one.
But those guys are both excellent defenders. I mean, Horford in particular with his versatility defensively, ability to defend either power forward or center. And in this series, either the Sixers' two best players in Simmons and Embiid. And then Baines was a revelation for them, a really important part of why they were the league's best defense during the regular season. So, and the post defense is probably the strength of his game. So not terribly surprising from the Baines standpoint. That Horford has had this much success has been a little bit of a surprise, but he's as crafty defensively as they come. He's seen it all.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. If my question would be then, we'll see what happens with the adjustment that Stevens makes. What do you think they might do now that they got a full helping of T.J. McConnell? What's the adjustment Brad Stevens comes with?
Maybe they'll be more aggressive about just making T.J. McConnell make shots. He knocked down that big three last night, but in general, if you're the Sixers, you want him driving against closeouts rather than shooting catch and shoot threes. And, that may be something they do is not full rotate to him when he does come open on the perimeter and, just take your chances with him shooting the three.
All right, Kevin Pelton, by the way, who tweeted that the frequent criticism of Sam Hinkie was that a guy like T.J. McConnell might not be in the league without – I've always said that, Kevin, that one thing that got overlooked was that the teams that had this onus that you've got to win 35, 40 games, whatever you can, sign these mid-level free agents, that they never gave time to players who maybe weren't ready, but that experience turned them into NBA players. McConnell's an example.
Yeah, why I said it was most frequent criticism is because I think even people who accepted the strategy overall and were like, yeah, this makes sense to accumulate as many lottery picks as you can and take the long view, still felt that there was an opportunity for the Sixers to be a little bit more competitive, particularly that last season where Hinkie was in Philadelphia and then, potentially take advantage of getting guys at reasonable rates in free agency. But one of the things that does is clog up your roster so you don't have as many guys on the long-term minimum salary contracts like T.J. McConnell, like Robert Covington, although, his spot on the roster by that point was pretty secure. And ultimately that allows you to take risks and go out and find guys who now are a part of your rotation, despite the fact that, in McConnell's case, he's still making the minimum.
Do you think they're kicking themselves on that Covington deal?
No, I don't. I think that'd be an overreaction to this series. He's had an excellent season for them, was on my all-defensive first team. I'm surprised that he's struggled as much defensively as he has in this series. It does seem like he's let his shooting slump get to the rest of his game in a way that, didn't happen when he slumped at the beginning of last season. But, I think that's still going to be an excellent value. And the other aspect of it is, particularly if you're trying to make trades as opposed to go out in free agency, you're going to need that it's helpful to have that kind of salary in making trades.
Kevin Pelton here. By the way, you wrote about this, about the difference between the other sports and coming down from 3-0. It's never happened in basketball. But do the Sixers have the makeup of a team that can buck that trend?
Yeah, I don't want to overstate the chances here. Again, there's a reason it's never happened because it's very difficult to do, particularly having to win, twice on the other team's home court. And then Game 7, home court advantage tends to be magnified in the NBA. So that's, would be the most difficult task if the Sixers could get it there. But, a situation where they came into the series as the favorites, have again been favored in every game, that's going to give you a much better chance, a more realistic chance of coming back than, someone who has kind of lost all hope or someone who's hopelessly outmatched in the series.
All right, Kevin Pelton. You can follow him at K Pelton, NBA writer, ESPN. The Pelton Cast, always a great NBA listen. And Game 5 tomorrow night in Boston, as Kevin mentioned. Sixers, a slight favorite in the game. He joined us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Thank you, Kevin.
All right, thanks for having me.